My father screamed at me in front of my children during Sunday lunch, calling us leeches who drained his money. But what he didn't know was that I owned the house he was living in, and my lawyer was already on the phone with an eviction notice ready to be served within the hour. The dining room fell into a suffocating silence as my father's words echoed off the walls of what he believed was his home. My two children, Emma, who is 9, and Jacob, who is 7, sat frozen with their forks halfway to their mouths, their eyes wide with confusion and hurt. My mother's hand trembled as she reached for her water glass, and my younger sister, Sarah, looked down at her plate, her cheeks flushed with embarrassment. The afternoon sunlight streaming through the bay windows seemed to mock the darkness of the moment, illuminating the expensive mahogany dining table that my father loved to boast about to his friends, never mentioning who actually paid for it. My name is Daniel Cooper, and I'm 34 years old. I work as a senior software engineer for a tech company in Austin, Texas, pulling in a comfortable 6-figure salary that I've worked my entire adult life to achieve. I started coding when I was 12, teaching myself in the public library because we couldn't afford a computer at home. My father, Robert Cooper, spent most of my childhood working as a mid-level manager at a manufacturing plant, a job he complained about constantly but never tried to improve upon. My mother, Linda, was a part-time receptionist at a dental office, always the peacemaker in our family, always smoothing over my father's rough edges and explosive temper. Growing up in a working-class neighborhood in San Antonio, I learned early that if I wanted something different from the life my parents had, I'd have to build it myself. My father never understood my passion for technology. He called it a waste of time, said I should learn a real trade like plumbing or electrical work. When I got a full scholarship to the University of Texas, he barely acknowledged it, showing up late to my graduation and leaving early to watch a football game. But I pushed forward, graduated top of my class, and landed a job that changed everything for me and eventually for my entire family, though they'd never admit how much I'd done for them. 4 years ago, my father lost his job at the plant. The company downsized, and at 58 years old, he found himself suddenly unemployed with minimal savings and a mortgage he couldn't afford. My mother called me in tears, explaining that they were going to lose their house. I was already dealing with my own struggles at the time. My wife, Rachel, had died in a car accident just 6 months earlier, leaving me alone with Emma and Jacob, trying to figure out how to be both mother and father to 2 grieving children while managing my own overwhelming grief. If you're connecting with this story so far, I'd really appreciate it if you could click that subscribe button. I'm working toward reaching 1,000 subscribers, and your support means everything. Just hit that red subscribe button. It only takes a second. Despite everything I was going through, I couldn't let my parents become homeless. So I made them an offer. I would buy them a house, a nice one, bigger than the cramped 3-bedroom they were about to lose. In exchange, they would help me with the kids. I needed support, and they needed a home. It seemed like the perfect solution. I found a beautiful 4-bedroom house in a quiet neighborhood in Round Rock, just 20 minutes from my place in Austin. The house cost me $450,000, money I had saved and invested wisely over the years. I put it entirely in my name, though I never explicitly told my parents that detail. They assumed, I suppose, that I was helping them buy it, that it was somehow theirs. My father's reaction to the house was complicated. On one hand, he was relieved to have a roof over his head. On the other hand, I could see it aided him that his son had to rescue him. He never said thank you, not once in 4 years. Instead, he found ways to criticize everything I did, as if by diminishing my accomplishments, he could somehow rebuild his own deflated ego. He'd tell his friends that he was retired, that he'd worked hard all his life, and now he could relax. He never mentioned that his retirement home was courtesy of his son's wallet. My mother, to her credit, was a tremendous help with Emma and Jacob in those first 2 years after Rachel died. She cooked meals, helped with homework, drove them to soccer practice and piano lessons. She filled some of the void that Rachel left, and I was genuinely grateful for that. My sister Sarah, who is 29 and worked as a nurse at a hospital in Austin, also pitched in when she could, though she had her own busy life. Sarah was always the favorite growing up, the one who could do no wrong in my father's eyes. She was easier, more compliant, less likely to challenge him the way I always did. As time went on, however, my father's behavior grew worse. The bitterness that had always lurked beneath the surface of his personality began to overflow. He started making comments about my parenting, about how I was raising the kids, about the choices I made. He'd undermine my discipline, telling Emma and Jacob they could have dessert before dinner after I'd said no, or letting them stay up past their bedtime when they were at his house. When I confronted him about it, he'd wave me off, saying I was too strict, that kids needed to be kids. The financial expectations also began to escalate. At first, I covered the property taxes and homeowners insurance on the house, which seemed reasonable since I owned it. Then I started paying for repairs and maintenance. The air conditioning needed to be replaced, $12,000. The roof needed work, $8,000. The kitchen appliances were outdated, $15,000 for a full upgrade that my mother wanted. I paid for all of it because I told myself they were family and the house was ultimately my investment anyway. But then came the requests for other things. My father wanted a new truck, his old one was making noises. Could I help out? That was $25,000. My mother needed dental work, extensive crowns and implants. That was $18,000. Sarah was going through a rough breakup and needed a place to stay while she got back on her feet. Could she move into the guest room? Of course she could, and I started covering extra groceries and utilities because of the additional person in the house. Take a moment and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. I'm getting close to that 1,000 subscriber goal, and every single subscription helps. Just click that button and be part of this journey with me. I never said no to any of these requests because I felt like I owed them something, some debt from childhood that I couldn't quite name, but always felt pressing down on my shoulders. My father had never been physically abusive, but there was an emotional weight to growing up under his constant disappointment. Nothing I did was ever quite good enough. When I brought home straight A's, he'd ask why I wasn't playing sports. When I got my first job offer with a starting salary of $70,000 right out of college, he asked why it wasn't at a more prestigious company. His love felt conditional, always dangling just out of reach, and some part of me, even as a successful adult, was still that kid trying to earn his approval. The breaking point began about 6 months ago. I met someone, a woman named Jennifer who worked in the marketing department at my company. She was kind, funny, great with the kids, and for the first time since Rachel died, I felt like maybe I could have a future that included someone other than just me and my children. We started dating seriously, and I could feel myself coming alive again in ways I hadn't thought possible. Emma and Jacob liked her too, which felt like a miracle. My father hated her on sight. He made no effort to hide his disdain. He called her a gold digger, said she was only interested in my money, questioned why a woman would want to date a man with 2 kids unless she had ulterior motives. Jennifer never did anything to deserve this treatment. She was a successful professional in her own right, making a good salary, completely independent. But my father couldn't see that or wouldn't see it. He saw only a threat, someone who might take his son's attention and resources away from him. The tensions grew steadily worse. My father started making passive-aggressive comments every time I brought Jennifer around. He'd compare her unfavorably to Rachel, which was particularly cruel because he knew how much I still grieved for my late wife. He'd find fault with everything, the way she dressed, the way she talked, the way she interacted with the kids. My mother would try to smooth things over, but she never directly contradicted my father. That wasn't how their marriage worked. He led, she followed, even when he was clearly in the wrong. I started limiting my visits to their house, which only made things worse. My father accused me of abandoning the family, of choosing an outsider over my own blood. He seemed completely oblivious to the irony of this accusation, given how little he'd ever been there for me emotionally throughout my life. Sarah tried to play mediator, but she was caught in the middle, and I knew my father was filling her head with his version of events, painting me as the ungrateful son who'd forgotten where he came from. 3 months ago, I made a decision. I asked Jennifer to marry me, and she said yes. I was happier than I'd been in years. Emma and Jacob were excited, already calling her bonus mom and making plans for the wedding. I knew I had to tell my family, and I dreaded it, but I hoped that maybe, just maybe, my father would see how happy I was and find it in himself to be supportive. I was wrong. When I told them at a family dinner, my father exploded. He accused me of disrespecting Rachel's memory, of moving too fast, of being selfish and thinking only of myself. He said the kids needed stability, not some random woman coming into their lives and trying to replace their mother. Jennifer wasn't even there. I'd wisely decided to tell them without her present, and I was glad for that decision because the things my father said that night were vicious. Make sure you hit that subscribe button and help me reach 1,000 subscribers. Your support really does make a difference, and I appreciate every single person who joins this community. Click subscribe right now. My mother cried, but whether from sadness or stress or agreement with my father, I couldn't tell. Sarah tried to defend me, saying that I deserved to be happy, that Rachel would have wanted me to move on eventually, but my father shouted her down too, accused her of taking sides against the family. It was a disaster, and I left that night wondering if the relationship with my parents could ever be repaired. Over the next several weeks, my father's behavior escalated. He started calling me at work, leaving angry voicemails about how I was making a mistake, how I was going to regret this, how I was destroying my children's lives. He showed up at my house unannounced, trying to talk me out of the engagement. He sent text messages at all hours, some angry, some guilt-tripping, all designed to manipulate me into doing what he wanted. I tried to set boundaries, but he didn't respect them. I told him I needed space, that I would reach out when I was ready to talk, but he ignored that. He enlisted my mother to call me, to plead his case, to try to convince me to slow down or call off the engagement entirely. He even had Sarah try, though I could tell her heart wasn't in it. She supported my happiness, but she was also tired of being in the middle of our family's dysfunction. The final straw came last Sunday. My father called and insisted that I bring the kids over for Sunday lunch. He said it had been too long, that Emma and Jacob missed their grandparents, that we needed to put this behind us and act like a family. Against my better judgment, I agreed. I thought maybe enough time had passed, maybe he'd calmed down, maybe we could have a civil meal and start to rebuild some bridges. I should have trusted my instincts. The lunch started off tense but manageable. My mother had made pot roast, which was always a family favorite. Emma and Jacob were happy to see their grandparents, chattering about school and their friends. Sarah was there too, trying to keep the conversation light, asking the kids about their upcoming spring break plans. My father was quiet, which should have been my first warning sign. When Robert Cooper was quiet, he was usually building up to something. We were about halfway through the meal when it happened. I mentioned casually that Jennifer and I had set a wedding date for late September. I wasn't trying to provoke anyone. I was just making conversation, answering my mother's question about whether we'd finalized any plans. The temperature in the room dropped immediately. My father's face went red, that familiar flush that I'd seen countless times throughout my childhood, the one that preceded an explosion. He slammed his hand down on the table, making everyone jump. Emma's water glass tipped over, and Jacob started to cry. And then my father stood up, pointed his finger at me, and shouted, "You and those brats do nothing but drain our money. You're leeches, all of you, sucking us dry while you make your selfish decisions." The words hung in the air like poison gas. My children, my innocent children who had lost their mother and were just trying to build a happy life, stared at their grandfather in shock. Emma's eyes filled with tears. Jacob was already sobbing. My mother gasped, and Sarah's mouth fell open. I felt something inside me snap, but it wasn't the hot rage I expected. It was cold, clear, and decisive. I stood up slowly, very slowly, and reached into my pocket. I pulled out a folder that I'd been carrying with me for the past week, ever since I'd made the decision about what I was going to do if my father pushed me one more time. I opened the folder and placed 3 documents on the table in front of him. The property deed to the house we were sitting in, with my name clearly listed as the sole owner. The mortgage payoff statement, showing that I'd paid $450,000 in cash. And the letter from my attorney, outlining the terms of the eviction notice that would be served if necessary. If you're finding this story as powerful as I am, please subscribe to the channel. I'm working hard to reach that 1,000 subscriber milestone, and every subscription counts. Hit that red button and join us." The silence that followed was absolute. My father's face went from red to white in an instant. He picked up the deed with shaking hands, stared at it as if he could will the words to change, but they didn't. My mother covered her mouth with both hands, tears streaming down her face. Sarah whispered, "Oh my God, Danny." "This house," I said quietly, my voice steady despite the storm of emotions inside me, "has been in my name for 4 years. I have paid every single expense associated with it. Property taxes, insurance, repairs, utilities, everything. I have paid for your truck, Dad. I paid for Mom's dental work. I paid for the new appliances, the roof, the air conditioning. I've put nearly $600,000 into keeping this family afloat over the past 4 years, and I have never asked for anything in return except basic respect." My father opened his mouth to speak, but nothing came out. He looked like a fish gasping for air. I continued, my words precise and deliberate. "You want to call my children leeches? You want to say we drain your money? You don't have any money. You haven't had any money since you lost your job 4 years ago. Everything you have, everything you've enjoyed, every comfortable moment you've experienced in this house has been because of me. The son you've spent my entire life telling wasn't good enough." My mother was crying openly now, but I couldn't afford to soften. This needed to be said, and it needed to be said in front of everyone. Emma and Jacob had stopped crying and were watching me with wide eyes, not fully understanding the adult complications, but sensing that something significant was happening. "I have tried," I continued, "to be a good son. I have tried to help you, to support you, to give you a comfortable retirement, even though you never saved for one yourself. I have tried to be patient with your criticism, your manipulation, your complete lack of gratitude. But I will not, I absolutely will not, allow you to traumatize my children the way you traumatized me growing up. I will not let you call them names or make them feel worthless because you're bitter about your own failures." My phone rang at that exact moment, as if I'd orchestrated the timing, though I hadn't. I looked at the screen and saw it was my attorney, Marcus, calling right on schedule. I'd asked him to call at exactly 1:30, which was 15 minutes into what I'd anticipated would be our lunch, long enough for things to potentially go south if they were going to. I answered the phone on speaker, so everyone could hear. "Daniel," Marcus's professional voice filled the dining room, "I'm calling to confirm that you want me to proceed with the 30-day eviction notice we discussed. I have the documents prepared and ready to file with the county court this afternoon. Should I move forward?" My father found his voice then, sputtering. "You can't do this. This is our home." I looked at him calmly. "It's my home, Dad. It has always been my home. You've been living here as my guest, and you've violated the terms of that arrangement by treating me and my children with disrespect and cruelty." Marcus continued on the phone. "I'll take your silence as confirmation to proceed. The notice will be served tomorrow morning. They'll have 30 days to vacate the premises, as per Texas law. After that, if they haven't left voluntarily, we can pursue formal eviction through the courts." Subscribe to the channel before we continue. I'm so close to 1,000 subscribers, and you can be part of hitting that goal. Just click that subscribe button. It takes just a second of your time. "Wait." My mother finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "Daniel, please, let's talk about this. Don't do this to your father, to our family." I felt my resolve waver for just a moment when I looked at my mother. She had helped me with the kids, had been there during some of my darkest days after Rachel died. But then I looked at Emma and Jacob, saw the confusion and hurt still lingering in their eyes, and my resolve hardened again. "Mom," I said gently, "I am not doing this to you. I am not doing this to the family. Dad did this when he chose to verbally abuse my children. He did this when he spent 4 years taking everything I offered and giving nothing but criticism and contempt in return. He did this when he refused to respect the boundaries I set or the choices I make for my own life." "Marcus," I said into the phone, "proceed with the filing." "Thank you." "Understood," Marcus replied. "I'll have the papers filed within the hour. The process server will be there at 8 a.m. tomorrow. Is there anything else you need from me right now? No, that's everything. I'll call you later this week to discuss next steps. I hung up the phone and placed it back in my pocket. My father had collapsed back into his chair, his face now a grayish color that made me momentarily worried he might be having a heart attack. But his eyes were clear, just shocked, disbelieving. He'd never imagined I'd actually do it, never believed I had it in me to stand up to him this completely. "You're going to kick your own parents out onto the street?" he asked, and there was something in his voice I'd never heard before. Vulnerability maybe, or fear. "No," I said firmly. "I'm going to end an arrangement that has become toxic and destructive. You have 30 days to find alternative housing. That's more than fair, considering the circumstances. I can provide you with the name of a real estate agent who specializes in rentals for retirees, if that would help. I can even offer to pay the first month's rent and security deposit on a reasonable apartment, something within your budget based on your Social Security and mom's part-time income." Sarah spoke up then, her voice shaky. "Danny, isn't there another way? Can't we all just sit down and talk this through?" I turned to my sister, and I felt a flash of frustration. "Sarah, we've been talking it through for months. I've tried setting boundaries, I've tried having calm conversations, I've tried giving space and time. None of it has worked because Dad doesn't want to change. He wants to control my life, and he wants me to keep funding his without any accountability or respect. That's not sustainable, and it's not healthy for anyone, especially not for my kids." I gathered Emma and Jacob close to me. "We're leaving now," I announced to the room. "I'll be in touch through my attorney regarding the logistics of the move. If you need to retrieve personal belongings after the 30 days, we can arrange supervised access. But I need you to understand that this boundary is not negotiable. The house is mine, and I will not allow it to be used as a base from which to launch attacks on my family." My mother stood up, reaching toward me with one hand. "Daniel, please, your father didn't mean it. He was just upset about the wedding, about everything changing. He loves you, he loves the kids." I felt tears pricking at my own eyes then, the first emotion I'd allowed myself to show since this confrontation began. "Mom, if this is what Dad's love looks like, then I don't want it. I don't want it for me, and I certainly don't want it for Emma and Jacob. They deserve grandparents who treat them with kindness, who build them up instead of tearing them down. And I deserve a father who respects me as an adult capable of making my own decisions, even if he doesn't agree with them." Please take a moment to subscribe if you're invested in how this turns out. I need your support to reach 1,000 subscribers, and it means the world when you click that button. Subscribe now and be part of the community. I walked toward the door with my children, and Sarah followed us out. On the front porch, away from our parents, she grabbed my arm. "Danny, I get it, I really do. But is this really what you want? To cut them off completely?" I looked at my sister, saw the genuine concern in her eyes, and felt some of my anger dissipate. "Sarah, I'm not cutting them off completely. I'm cutting off the unhealthy dynamic where they take everything from me and give nothing but criticism in return. If Dad can learn to respect boundaries, if he can learn to treat me and my family with basic decency, then maybe we can rebuild something. But I'm done being his emotional punching bag, and I'm absolutely done allowing him to traumatize my children." Sarah nodded slowly, tears in her own eyes. "I understand. And for what it's worth, I think you're incredibly brave. I've watched Dad do this to you our whole lives, and I've never had the courage to stand up to him the way you just did." "You've been caught in the middle," I acknowledged. "I don't envy that position, and I don't expect you to take sides. But I do need you to understand that this isn't me being vindictive or cruel. This is me protecting my kids and myself from further harm." We hugged, and then Sarah went back inside. I buckled Emma and Jacob into my car and drove away from that house, possibly for the last time as a family gathering place. The kids were quiet in the back seat, processing what they'd witnessed. After about 10 minutes, Emma spoke up from behind me. "Dad, what Grandpa said about us being leeches, is that true? Are we bad?" My heart broke all over again. I pulled over into a parking lot and turned around to face my children. "No, sweetheart, absolutely not. What Grandpa said was wrong, and it came from his own anger and frustration, not from anything you did. You and Jacob are the best things in my life, and you never have been and never will be a burden to me. I love you both more than anything in this world. Jacob, still sniffling, asked, "Why was Grandpa so mean?" How do you explain adult dysfunction to a 7-year-old? I tried my best. Sometimes when people are unhappy with themselves, they take it out on other people, especially people they love. It's not right and it's not fair, but it happens. Grandpa is dealing with a lot of difficult feelings, and he made a very bad choice about how to express them. That's why we had to leave, and that's why I had to set some new rules about how our family interacts. Emma, who is wise beyond her 9 years, said quietly, "Are we still going to see Grandma?" "I hope so," I told her honestly. "We'll have to figure out how that works, but I want you to have a relationship with your grandmother, if that's something you want. We just need to make sure that everyone treats everyone else with respect and kindness. Does that make sense?" Both kids nodded, and we drove home in contemplative silence. When we got back to our house in Austin, Jennifer was waiting for us. She'd been grocery shopping and was in the kitchen putting things away. She took one look at my face and knew something major had happened. After I got the kids settled in the living room with the movie, I told Jennifer everything that had transpired. She listened without interrupting, and when I finished, she wrapped her arms around me and held me tight. "I'm so sorry you had to do that," she whispered. "I know how hard that must have been. I keep second-guessing myself," I admitted, wondering if I overreacted, if I should have tried one more time to work things out. Jennifer pulled back and looked me in the eyes. "Daniel, he called your children leeches. Your children who lost their mother, who've been through more trauma in their young lives than most people experience in a lifetime. He called them leeches in front of them, knowing it would hurt them. That's not a moment of poor judgment. That's cruelty. You did the right thing protecting them." Hit that subscribe button if you haven't yet. I'm building this channel with your help, and every subscriber brings me closer to that 1,000 subscriber goal. Click it now and be part of this journey. Over the next few days, I waited for the fallout. The process server reported that he'd successfully delivered the eviction notice to my parents on Monday morning at 8 a.m. as planned. My father refused to take the papers at first, but the server left them on the property as required by law, so the notice was legally served regardless of whether my father accepted them physically. My mother called me on Tuesday afternoon. I saw her name on the caller ID and debated whether to answer, but ultimately I picked up. "Hi, Mom." "Daniel." Her voice sounded tired, strained. "We need to talk about this situation. Your father is devastated. He barely slept last night. Can we please sit down together and work this out like adults?" I sat down at my kitchen table, steeling myself for this conversation. "Mom, there's nothing to work out. The decision has been made. Dad crossed a line that I will not allow to be crossed. He traumatized my children, and he did it deliberately because he was angry with me. That's unacceptable." "He didn't mean it," she pleaded. "You know how your father gets when he's upset. He says things he doesn't mean. He's always been like that." Yes, I agreed. He has always been like that. He's always said hurtful things when he's upset, and the family has always made excuses for him and expected everyone else to just accept it and move on. But I'm not doing that anymore, Mom. That pattern has to end, and if it means I'm the bad guy in this situation, then so be it. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Then my mother said something that surprised me. "You're right." "What?" "You're right," she repeated, and I could hear her crying softly. "Your father has been horrible to you. I've watched it happen for years, and I've never done enough to stop it. I've always told myself that it was just his way, that he didn't mean it, but the truth is that impact matters more than intent. He's hurt you over and over again, and I've enabled it by not standing up to him." I wasn't prepared for this acknowledgement, and I felt my throat tighten with emotion. "Mom, I don't want to hurt you in this. I know you're caught in an impossible position." "No," she said firmly, more firmly than I'd heard her speak in a long time. "I'm not in an impossible position. I'm in a position where I need to make a choice. I need to decide whether I'm going to continue enabling your father's behavior or whether I'm going to support my son and my grandchildren. And when I put it that way, the choice is actually quite clear." I didn't know what to say. This was so unexpected that I couldn't quite process it. What are you saying, Mom? I'm saying that I understand why you did what you did. I'm saying that your father was wrong, and I'm going to tell him that. And I'm saying that I want to maintain a relationship with you and Emma and Jacob, whatever that needs to look like. If that means I see you separately from your father, then that's what it means. We talked for another 30 minutes, and for the first time in my adult life, I felt like my mother and I were having a real, honest conversation without the shadow of my father's expectations hanging over us. She told me about years of his criticism, his controlling behavior, his inability to take responsibility for his own choices. She told me about the toll it had taken on her mental health, about how she'd lost herself trying to keep the peace. If this story is resonating with you, please subscribe to the channel. Every subscription helps me reach that goal of 1,000 subscribers. Click that red button and join this community. By the end of the week, my mother had made a decision. She called me on Friday evening and told me she was leaving my father. Not permanently necessarily, she said, but she needed space to think about what she wanted for the rest of her life. She asked if she could stay with me for a while, and after talking it through with Jennifer, I agreed. She moved into our guest room on Saturday morning, bringing just 2 suitcases of clothes and personal items. My father, according to Sarah, who had been checking in on him, was a mess. He was angry, confused, and playing the victim to anyone who would listen. He told Sarah that I'd betrayed the family, that I was breaking apart the Coopers over a simple misunderstanding. He said my mother was being manipulated by me, that she'd come to her senses and come back home soon. Sarah told me all this with a weary tone, exhausted by his inability to see his own role in the situation. Emma and Jacob were thrilled to have their grandmother staying with us. She helped with breakfast before school, was there when they got home in the afternoon, and settled back into the supportive grandmother role she'd played right after Rachel died. But there was something different about her now, a lightness that I hadn't seen before. She smiled more, laughed more easily, seemed more present. One evening, about 10 days after she'd moved in, I found her sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of tea, looking thoughtful. I poured myself a glass of water and sat down across from her. "Penny, for your thoughts?"
She smiled at me.
"I was just thinking about how quiet it is here, how peaceful. I didn't realize how much tension I was living with until I wasn't living with it anymore." "How are you feeling about everything?" I asked gently. She considered the question carefully. "Honestly, I feel guilty for feeling relieved. I've been married to your father for 37 years, and I do love him in many ways. But Daniel, I'm also exhausted. I'm tired of walking on eggshells, tired of managing his moods, tired of making excuses for him. And watching him call your children leeches, seeing the look on their faces, it broke something in me. I realized that I'd been complicit in his behavior by not standing up against it." "You're not responsible for his choices, Mom." "No," she agreed, "but I am responsible for my own. And I chose for a very long time to prioritize his comfort over everyone else's well-being, including my own. I need to figure out if that's a pattern I want to continue, or if I want something different for whatever years I have left." We sat in comfortable silence for a moment, and then she asked, "How are the kids doing? Really doing?" I thought about Emma and Jacob, about the conversations we'd had over the past week and a half. They're confused but resilient. Emma asked me if she did something wrong to make Grandpa angry. That was hard to hear. But I think they're okay overall. Kids are remarkably adaptable, and they feel safe here. That's what matters most. My mother reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "You're a wonderful father, Daniel. I don't think I've ever told you that clearly enough. You've raised those children with so much love and patience, especially after losing Rachel. I'm proud of you." Those words, coming from my mother, meant more than she could know. I'd spent so much of my life seeking my father's approval that I'd almost forgotten that my mother's opinion mattered too. Thank you, Mom. That means a lot. Don't forget to subscribe to help me reach 1,000 subscribers. Your support is what keeps this channel going, and I appreciate every single person who clicks that button.
Hit subscribe now.
The 30-day deadline approached faster than I expected. My attorney called me on day 20 to ask whether my parents had made any moves toward finding alternative housing. I told him about my mother staying with me, but as far as I knew, my father was still in the house with no plans to leave. If he's still there on day 31, Marcus explained, we'll need to file with a court for formal eviction proceedings. That could take another 30 to 60 days, depending on the court's schedule and whether he contests it. I need you to be prepared for this to potentially get messy. I had hoped it wouldn't come to that, but I wasn't surprised. My father was stubborn, and his pride wouldn't let him admit defeat easily. Do what needs to be done, I told Marcus. I'm not backing down on this. On day 29, Sarah called me in the evening. Danny, I need to tell you something. Dad called me today and asked me to talk to you about letting him stay in the house. He's willing to apologize to you and the kids if you'll drop the eviction. I felt a surge of frustration mixed with something else, maybe disappointment. Sarah, an apology at this point isn't about genuine remorse. It's about him trying to maintain his living situation. If he were truly sorry, he would have apologized weeks ago, not the day before he's legally required to leave. Sarah sighed heavily. I know. I told him the same thing, but he insisted I call you. He's desperate, Danny. He's been looking at apartments, and he's realizing that what he can afford on Social Security is nothing like the house you bought. He's scared. He should have thought about that before he called my children leeches, I said, and my voice was harder than I intended. Sarah, I know this is difficult for you. I know you love Dad, and you don't want to see him struggle. But he made his choices, and now he has to live with the consequences. That's what being an adult means. I know, she said quietly. I'm not asking you to change your mind. I just promised him I'd call. But for what it's worth, I think you're doing the right thing. Dad needs to learn that his actions have consequences, and maybe this is the wake-up call he needs. We talked for a few more minutes, and after I hung up, Jennifer found me standing in the kitchen, staring out the window at the darkening sky. She wrapped her arms around me from behind and rested her chin on my shoulder. Your sister?
Yeah.
Dad wants to apologize in exchange for letting him stay in the house. Jennifer was quiet for a moment, then asked, What do you want to do? Exactly what I'm already doing, I said firmly. This isn't about punishment. It's about boundaries. If I let him manipulate his way back in with a forced apology, nothing will change. He'll just learn that he can push me to my breaking point and then say the magic words to reset everything. I can't teach my kids that that's how relationships work. I love you, Jennifer said simply. I love that you're strong enough to do the hard thing, even when it would be easier to give in. Day 30 came and went. My father did not leave the house. On day 31, Marcus filed the formal eviction proceedings with the county court. The court date was set for 6 weeks out, which meant my father could legally stay in the property until the judge ordered otherwise. It was frustrating, but I'd known this was a possibility. What I didn't expect was for my father to hire his own attorney. Apparently, he'd been talking to some of his old friends from the manufacturing plant, and one of them had recommended a lawyer who specialized in tenant rights. This attorney filed a motion claiming that my father had an implied lease agreement based on 4 years of continuous occupancy and that I couldn't simply evict him without proper cause. Marcus assured me that the motion wouldn't hold up. You own the property outright, you gave proper notice, and Texas law is pretty clear on property owner rights. But it's going to drag things out another month or two while the judge reviews everything. Your father is basically trying to buy time. Subscribe to the channel if you're following this story. I'm working toward 1,000 subscribers, and your support means everything. Just click that subscribe button and be part of this community. The court hearing was scheduled for mid-April, about 8 weeks after I'd first served the eviction notice. In the meantime, life continued in its strange, new normal. My mother stayed with us, and she seemed to blossom in ways I'd never seen before. She started going to yoga classes, joined a book club, made new friends who weren't connected to my father. She even started seeing a therapist to work through her complicated feelings about her marriage. Emma and Jacob adjusted to having their grandmother living with us. On weekends, my mother would take them to the park or the library, giving Jennifer and me some time alone together. She helped with homework and piano practice, and she never once tried to undermine my authority the way my father had. It was the supportive, healthy grandparent relationship I'd always wanted for my kids. My father, according to Sarah, who continued to check on him, was not doing well. He'd stopped taking care of the house, letting dishes pile up and laundry go unwashed. He ordered takeout for most meals because he'd never learned to cook for himself. He spent his days watching television and growing increasingly bitter about his situation. Sarah tried to encourage him to use this time to reflect on his behavior, to maybe consider therapy himself, but he refused. He was convinced that he was the victim in this situation, that I was the one being unreasonable. 3 weeks before the court hearing, something unexpected happened. I came home from work on a Tuesday evening to find my mother sitting at the kitchen table with an envelope in her hands, looking troubled. "What's wrong, Mom?" She held up the envelope. "This came for me today. It's from your father's attorney. He's filing for legal separation and wants me to sign papers agreeing to certain financial terms." I sat down across from her, suddenly worried. "What kind of financial terms?" She opened the envelope and pulled out several pages of legal documents. As she read through them, her expression shifted from troubled to angry. "He wants me to agree that I have no claim to any assets or property, including the house he's currently occupying. He's trying to establish that everything belongs solely to him so that when the eviction hearing happens, he can claim he's the only resident and I abandoned the marital home." "That's ridiculous," I said, feeling my own anger rise. "The house doesn't belong to him at all. It belongs to me. And Mom, you should talk to your own lawyer before signing anything. Don't let him bully you into an agreement that isn't fair to you." My mother looked at me with an expression I'd never quite seen on her face before. It was determination mixed with resolve. "I'm not signing anything. And I'm filing for divorce, not just separation. I'm done, Daniel. I've spent the last 2 months away from your father, and I've realized that I don't want to go back. I don't want to spend whatever years I have left managing his moods and making myself smaller, so he can feel bigger." I reached across the table and took her hand. "I support whatever decision you make, Mom. And if you need help with legal fees or anything else, I'm here."
"Thank you, sweetheart."
I've actually been thinking about getting a job, something more substantial than part-time receptionist work. I still have skills, and I'm only 62. I could work for another several years if I wanted to. I don't want to be dependent on anyone, not your father, not you. I want to build my own life on my own terms." I felt an overwhelming sense of pride in my mother at that moment. She was reinventing herself at 62, finding courage she didn't know she had. "That's incredible, Mom. I think that's exactly what you should do." Over the next 2 weeks, my mother hired a divorce attorney, filed papers, and started job hunting. She had worked as a receptionist for years and had excellent organizational skills, so she applied for administrative assistant positions at several companies in the Austin area. To her delight, she got 3 interviews and 2 job offers. She accepted a position at a medical supply company, working full-time with benefits, starting at $42,000 a year. It wasn't a fortune, but it was enough for her to be independent. Make sure to hit that subscribe button. I'm getting so close to 1,000 subscribers, and each one of you makes a difference. Click subscribe and help me reach that goal. The night before the eviction hearing, I couldn't sleep. I lay awake thinking about everything that had happened over the past few months, about how dramatically my family had changed. Part of me still felt guilty, still wondered if I could have handled things differently, if there was some way I could have maintained a relationship with my father without sacrificing my own boundaries and my children's well-being. Jennifer sensed I was awake and rolled over to face me in the darkness. "You're overthinking this." "How do you know what I'm thinking?" I asked with a small smile. "Because I know you. You're wondering if you're doing the right thing, if you're being too harsh, if there was another way. Am I close?" "Uncomfortably close," I admitted. She reached out and touched my face gently. "Daniel, you gave your father every opportunity to treat you and your family with respect. You set boundaries, you communicated clearly, you tried to work things out. He chose not to respect any of that. What happened is not your fault, and you're not being harsh. You're being a good father to your children, and you're modeling for them what healthy boundaries look like." That's one of the most important things you can teach them. I just keep thinking about that moment at the dinner table when he called them leeches. The look on Emma's face, the way Jacob started crying. I can't get it out of my head. Good, Jennifer said firmly. Don't get it out of your head. Remember it tomorrow when you're in that courtroom. Remember why you're doing this. It's not about revenge or punishment. It's about protecting your children from emotional abuse. That's what good parents do. The eviction hearing was at 9 a.m. at the Travis County Courthouse. I arrived with Marcus at 8:30, and we went through security and made our way to the appropriate courtroom. My father was already there with his attorney, a sharp-looking man in his 50s named William Brennan. My father looked older than I remembered, more worn down. He was wearing a suit that didn't quite fit right, and he wouldn't meet my eyes. Sarah was there too, sitting in the gallery to support both of us, though I wasn't sure how that was possible. My mother had chosen not to come, saying it would be too emotionally difficult and that she trusted me to handle it. Jennifer had offered to take the day off work to be there, but I told her it wasn't necessary. I needed to do this on my own. The judge, a woman in her 60s named Judge Patricia Morrison, called the case. Marcus presented our side first, laying out the facts clearly and concisely. I owned the property outright. I had allowed my parents to live there rent-free for 4 years. I had given proper 30-day notice as required by law. My father had refused to vacate. The law was clear that I had the right to evict him. Then William Brennan stood up and presented my father's case. He argued that my father had an implied tenancy based on 4 years of continuous occupancy, that I had never charged rent, which established a pattern of permanent residency, and that the eviction was retaliatory in nature following a family dispute. He painted me as a vindictive son who was using his financial power to punish his elderly father over a disagreement. It was hard to sit there and listen to that characterization of events, to hear myself described as the villain in the story. But Marcus had prepared me for this, had told me that opposing counsel would try to make it seem like I was the bad guy. I kept my expression neutral and let Marcus handle the response. Marcus stood and addressed the judge calmly. Your Honor, Mr. Brennan's characterization of events is misleading. Mr. Daniel Cooper has provided his parents with free housing valued at over $500,000 for 4 years. He has paid all expenses associated with the property, including significant repairs and upgrades. He asked for nothing in return except basic respect and healthy family dynamics. When his father verbally abused Mr. Cooper's minor children in front of them, calling them leeches and other derogatory terms, Mr. Cooper made the decision to end the living arrangement. That is not retaliatory, that is protective. Mr. Cooper has every legal right to determine who lives in his property, and Texas law does not recognize implied permanent tenancy in situations like this. Judge Morrison asked my father's attorney several pointed questions about the nature of the implied tenancy claim, and I could tell from her tone that she was skeptical. Then she asked if my father would like to address the court directly. William Brennan nodded, and my father stood up slowly. Your Honor, my father began, and his voice sounded strained. I know I made mistakes. I said things I shouldn't have said. But that house has been my home for 4 years. My wife and I built a life there. I don't have anywhere else to go. If you evict me, I'll end up in some terrible apartment, probably in a bad neighborhood, all alone. My son has plenty of money, plenty of room. Why can't we just work this out as a family instead of dragging it through the courts? I felt a pang in my chest listening to him. He sounded so pathetic, so defeated. But then I remembered Emma's face, remembered Jacob crying, remembered years of criticism and conditional love, and I hardened my heart. If you're invested in this story, please subscribe to the channel. I need your help to reach 1,000 subscribers, and every subscription counts. Hit that button now. Judge Morrison looked at my father with an expression that was somewhere between sympathy and exasperation. Mr. Cooper, I understand that this is a difficult situation for you. However, this is not family court, and I cannot order adult children to house their parents. This is a property dispute, and the law is quite clear. Your son owns the property. He gave you proper notice to vacate. You chose not to vacate. That gives him the legal right to proceed with eviction.
She turned to look at me then.
Mr. Daniel Cooper, would you like to address the court? Marcus nodded at me, and I stood up. I hadn't planned to speak, but suddenly I felt like I needed to. Your Honor, I want to be clear that I take no pleasure in this situation. My father is right that I have the financial means to continue housing him indefinitely. But money isn't the issue here. The issue is about boundaries and respect. I cannot allow my children to be exposed to verbal abuse, even if it comes from their grandfather. I cannot continue to enable behavior that is harmful to my family's well-being. I offered to help my father find alternative housing, even offered to pay first month's rent and security deposit.
He refused.
He chose instead to dig in and fight this in court. I'm asking you to enforce my legal rights as the property owner and grant the eviction. Judge Morrison nodded slowly, made some notes, and then delivered her ruling. I'm granting the eviction. Mr. Robert Cooper, you have 14 days from today to vacate the property located at the address on file. If you have not vacated by that time, the Sheriff's Department will be authorized to remove you and your belongings. Mr. Daniel Cooper retains all rights to the property. This court is adjourned. The gavel came down, and it was over. My father sat down heavily, his face gray. William Brennan put a hand on his shoulder and spoke to him in low tones. I stood up with Marcus, feeling a strange mix of relief and sadness. As we walked out of the courtroom, Sarah caught up with me in the hallway. Danny, can we talk for a minute? I nodded, and Marcus discreetly moved away to give us privacy. Sarah looked torn, caught between loyalties as she had been this entire time. I know you did what you had to do, she said quietly. I just want you to know that I understand, and I don't blame you. But Dad is really struggling, and I'm worried about him. I'm worried about him too, I admitted, and I meant it. But Sarah, I can't set myself on fire to keep him warm. I can't sacrifice my children's emotional health to make sure Dad is comfortable. That's not fair to them, and it's not healthy for any of us. Sarah nodded, tears in her eyes. I know. I just wish there was a way for this to have ended differently. So do I said honestly. But Dad chose this path. At every point, he could have chosen differently. He could have respected my boundaries, he could have apologized genuinely, he could have worked with me instead of against me. He chose not to do any of those things. We hugged, and Sarah went back to check on our father. I met Marcus outside, and we walked to the parking lot together. That went about as well as it could have, Marcus said. Judge Morrison saw right through Brennan's arguments. Your father will be out in 2 weeks, and you can move on with your life. Thank you for everything, Marcus. I know this wasn't the most exciting case you've ever handled. He smiled. Actually, family disputes are some of the most emotionally complex cases I deal with. You handled yourself well in there. A lot of people would have backed down when their father made that speech about being alone in a bad apartment. You stayed strong. That night, I told Jennifer, my mother, and the kids about the hearing outcome. My mother cried, but she also seemed relieved. I know this was necessary, she said. But it's still sad to see a marriage and a family break apart like this. You're not breaking apart the family, Mom. You're saving yourself, and that's brave. Dad is the one who broke things with his behavior. You're just refusing to keep pretending everything is fine when it's not. Emma asked if she would ever see her grandfather again, and I answered honestly. I don't know, sweetheart. Maybe someday if Grandpa learns to treat people better. But right now, he needs to work on himself, and we need to focus on our own family and making sure everyone feels safe and respected. Don't forget to subscribe to support this channel. I'm working hard to reach 1,000 subscribers, and you can help me get there. Just click that red button. The next 2 weeks were tense. I hired a moving company to help my father pack and transport his belongings to wherever he was going. Through Sarah, I learned that he'd found a one-bedroom apartment in a less desirable part of town, the kind of place he could afford on his Social Security check. It was a far cry from the house I'd bought, but it was clean and safe, and that was what mattered. On moving day, I made the decision to be there. I knew it would be uncomfortable, but I felt like I needed to see it through, to face my father one more time. I arrived at the house at 8 a.m., just as the movers were pulling up. My father was sitting on the front porch, surrounded by boxes, looking lost. When he saw me, something flickered across his face. Anger maybe, or shame, or some combination of both. I walked up the front steps and stood there, not quite sure what to say. Finally, my father spoke first. "Come to watch me get thrown out of my own home?" There was bitterness in his voice, but less heat than I expected. "No," I said calmly. "I came to make sure you have everything you need for the move. I brought some groceries for your new place, some basic supplies. I know you're starting over with less than you're used to, and I wanted to help with that part at least." He looked at the box of groceries I was carrying, and for a moment, I thought he might throw them back in my face. But instead, he just nodded and looked away. "Your mother's not coming back, is she?"
No, Dad.
"She's filed for divorce. She's building her own life now." He was quiet for a long time, watching the movers load furniture into the truck. Then he said, "I never meant to hurt those kids. Emma and Jacob. I was just so angry at you, at the situation, at feeling like I'd lost control of my own life. But I shouldn't have said what I said." It was the closest thing to an apology I'd heard from him, and I recognized it for what it was: genuine regret wrapped in explanation and justification. It wasn't enough, not nearly enough, but it was something. "Dad, the problem isn't just what you said that one time. It's a pattern that's been going on my whole life. You've never been happy with who I am or the choices I make. You've always found something to criticize, some way to make me feel like I'm not measuring up. And then when I finally have the courage to set boundaries, you escalate instead of respecting them. That's why we're here." My father looked at me then, really looked at me, and I saw something in his eyes I'd never seen before. Recognition maybe, or understanding. "You're right," he said quietly. "I've been a terrible father to you. I don't know why. Maybe because you reminded me of all the things I wanted to be, but never became. Maybe because it was easier to tear you down than to face my own failures. I don't know. But you're right." I felt tears prickling at my eyes, not from sadness, but from the release of something I'd been holding onto for decades. "I needed to hear that, Dad. Thank you for saying it." "Does it change anything?" he asked. I thought about that question carefully before answering. "I don't know. Maybe eventually. But right now, I need you to work on yourself. Get some therapy, figure out why you do the things you do, learn how to have healthy relationships. And I need to focus on my kids and my future with Jennifer. Maybe someday we can try to rebuild something, but it would have to be completely different from what we had before. It would have to be based on mutual respect and healthy boundaries." My father nodded slowly. "I suppose that's more than I deserve after everything." The movers finished loading the truck, and it was time for my father to leave. I helped him into his car, an old sedan that had seen better days, and watched as he followed the moving truck toward his new apartment. Sarah had agreed to meet him there and help him unpack, to make sure he was settled. I was grateful for her willingness to be that bridge, even though I knew it cost her emotionally. I stood in the driveway of the empty house, the house I'd bought to save my parents, and that had become the symbol of everything broken in our family. I'd have to decide what to do with it now. Rent it out maybe, or sell it. But for the moment, I just stood there, feeling the weight of the past few months finally lifting from my shoulders. Take a moment to subscribe if you're still with me. I appreciate every person who helps me reach that goal of 1,000 subscribers. Click that button and be part of this community. Life moved forward in the weeks and months that followed. My mother's divorce was finalized in July, and she moved into her own small apartment near her new job. She was thriving in ways I'd never imagined, making friends, exploring hobbies, living a life that was entirely her own for the first time in decades. She saw Emma and Jacob regularly, taking them for weekends sometimes, always treating them with love and respect. Jennifer and I got married in late September, just as we'd planned. It was a beautiful ceremony in a garden venue outside Austin, with about 80 guests including friends, colleagues, and Jennifer's large, warm family. Emma was a junior bridesmaid, and Jacob was the ring bearer. My mother was there, beaming with happiness. Sarah was there too, serving as one of my groomsmen in a show of support that meant the world to me. My father was not invited, and he knew better than to show up. According to Sarah, he was still struggling but had finally started seeing a therapist after she'd insisted on it as a condition of her continued support. He was living in his small apartment, getting by on his social security and a part-time job he'd found at a hardware store. It wasn't the retirement he'd imagined, but it was what his choices had led to. About a month after the wedding, something unexpected happened. I received a letter in the mail from my father. It was handwritten on plain notebook paper, several pages long. I almost threw it away without reading it, but Jennifer encouraged me to at least see what it said. The letter was different from anything my father had ever said to me before. It was raw, honest, and deeply apologetic. He took full responsibility for his behavior, not just the incident at the Sunday lunch, but everything going back to my childhood. He talked about his own upbringing, about a father who had been even more critical and distant than he'd been with me, about how he'd unconsciously repeated those patterns without realizing the damage he was causing. He talked about the work he was doing in therapy, about the things he was learning about himself, about his deep regret for the years he'd wasted being angry instead of appreciating what he had. He apologized specifically to Emma and Jacob, saying that calling them leeches was the worst thing he'd ever done and that he understood if they never wanted to see him again. He apologized to my mother for not being the partner she deserved, for taking her for granted, for expecting her to manage his emotions instead of learning to manage them himself. And he apologized to me for not being the father I needed, for letting his own insecurities poison our relationship, for failing to celebrate my successes instead of resenting them. At the end of the letter, he wrote that he wasn't asking for forgiveness or reconciliation. He was simply taking accountability and letting me know that he was working on becoming a better person, even if that work came decades too late to save our relationship. He said he was proud of me, of the father I'd become, of the life I'd built, and that he wished he'd been able to tell me that years ago when it might have mattered more. I read the letter 3 times, and each time I felt something shifting inside me. It wasn't instant forgiveness, nothing that simple or easy. But it was a crack in the wall I'd built around my heart, a tiny opening that maybe, eventually, could lead to something resembling healing. I showed the letter to Jennifer, to my mother, and to Sarah. They all agreed it seemed genuine, a real breakthrough rather than another manipulation. My mother, in particular, seemed moved by it. "That's the man I married," she said softly. "The person he was before life and disappointment hardened him. I'm glad he's finding his way back to that, even if it's too late for us." I didn't respond to the letter immediately. I needed time to process it, to figure out what, if anything, I wanted to do with this olive branch my father was extending. In the meantime, life continued to be good. My career was thriving, with a promotion to lead architect on a major project. Jennifer was doing well in her own career and had become an incredible stepmother to Emma and Jacob. The kids were happy, healthy, and thriving in school and their activities. Make sure you're subscribed to the channel. I'm almost at that 1,000 subscriber goal, and your support is what makes this possible. Hit that subscribe button right now. About 3 months after I received the letter, I made a decision. I called Sarah and asked if she thought my father would be open to having coffee with me, just the two of us, no expectations or agenda other than talking. Sarah said she thought he would be, that he'd been hoping for contact, but respecting my space. So we set up a meeting at a neutral coffee shop halfway between our homes. I was nervous driving there, not sure what I'd say or how I'd feel seeing him face to face after all these months. When I walked into the coffee shop, he was already there, sitting at a corner table, looking older and more vulnerable than I remembered. He stood up when he saw me, and for a moment, we just looked at each other. "Thank you for coming," he said quietly. "I wasn't sure you would." We sat down, and for the first few minutes, we made awkward small talk about the weather, about Austin traffic, about anything other than the elephant in the room. Finally, I took a deep breath and said, "I got your letter. I've read it several times." My father nodded, his hands wrapped tightly around his coffee cup. "I meant every word. I've been doing a lot of thinking, a lot of work with my therapist, and I'm starting to understand how much damage I caused. Not just recently, but over your whole life. I'm sorry, Daniel. I'm so deeply sorry." We talked for 2 hours that afternoon. Really talked, maybe for the first time ever. He told me about his own childhood, about a father who measured love in criticism and withheld affection as punishment. He told me about feeling like a failure in his career, watching younger men get promoted past him, feeling trapped in a job he hated but lacking the courage to change. He told me about his resentment toward my success, how instead of being proud, he felt diminished by it, as if my accomplishments somehow highlighted his failures. I told him about growing up feeling like I was never good enough, about the years I spent trying to earn his approval only to realize it might never come. I told him about the impact his behavior had on my self-esteem, about how I still sometimes heard his critical voice in my head when I was facing challenges. I told him about the moment at the Sunday lunch, about how seeing my children hurt by his words had finally given me the strength to draw the line I should have drawn years earlier. "I don't know if we can have a relationship, Dad," I said honestly. "Too much has happened, and trust doesn't rebuild overnight. But I'm willing to consider the possibility. Maybe start with occasional coffee like this. See if you can maintain the changes you're making. I need to see consistent, long-term change before I can let you back into my life or my children's lives." My father nodded, and I saw tears in his eyes. "I understand. That's more than fair. I'll take whatever you're willing to give, and I won't push for more. I'm just grateful you're willing to have this conversation at all." We ended that meeting with a handshake, not a hug, but it was a start. Over the next several months, we met for coffee every few weeks. Sometimes the conversations went well, and I could see glimpses of the person my father was becoming. Other times, old patterns would emerge, a critical comment or a defensive response, and I'd have to remind him of the boundaries I'd set. But he'd apologize, correct himself, and the fact that he was willing to do that work was significant. My father was not invited, and he knew better than to show up. According to Sarah, he was still struggling but had finally started seeing a therapist after she'd insisted on it as a condition of her continued support. He was living in his small apartment, getting by on his social security and a part-time job he'd found at a hardware store. It wasn't the retirement he'd imagined, but it was what his choices had led to. About a month after the wedding, something unexpected happened. I received a letter in the mail from my father. It was handwritten on plain notebook paper, several pages long. I almost threw it away without reading it, but Jennifer encouraged me to at least see what it said. The letter was different from anything my father had ever said to me before. It was raw, honest, and deeply apologetic. He took full responsibility for his behavior, not just the incident at the Sunday lunch, but everything going back to my childhood. He talked about his own upbringing, about a father who had been even more critical and distant than he'd been with me, about how he'd unconsciously repeated those patterns without realizing the damage he was causing. He talked about the work he was doing in therapy, about the things he was learning about himself, about his deep regret for the years he'd wasted being angry instead of appreciating what he had. He apologized specifically to Emma and Jacob, saying that calling them leeches was the worst thing he'd ever done and that he understood if they never wanted to see him again. He apologized to my mother for not being the partner she deserved, for taking her for granted, for expecting her to manage his emotions instead of learning to manage them himself. And he apologized to me for not being the father I needed, for letting his own insecurities poison our relationship, for failing to celebrate my successes instead of resenting them. At the end of the letter, he wrote that he wasn't asking for forgiveness or reconciliation. He was simply taking accountability and letting me know that he was working on becoming a better person, even if that work came decades too late to save our relationship. He said he was proud of me, of the father I'd become, of the life I'd built, and that he wished he'd been able to tell me that years ago when it might have mattered more. I read the letter 3 times, and each time I felt something shifting inside me. It wasn't instant forgiveness, nothing that simple or easy. But it was a crack in the wall I'd built around my heart, a tiny opening that maybe, eventually, could lead to something resembling healing. I showed the letter to Jennifer, to my mother, and to Sarah. They all agreed it seemed genuine, a real breakthrough rather than another manipulation. My mother, in particular, seemed moved by it. "That's the man I married," she said softly. "The person he was before life and disappointment hardened him. I'm glad he's finding his way back to that, even if it's too late for us." I didn't respond to the letter immediately. I needed time to process it, to figure out what, if anything, I wanted to do with this olive branch my father was extending. In the meantime, life continued to be good. My career was thriving, with a promotion to lead architect on a major project. Jennifer was doing well in her own career and had become an incredible stepmother to Emma and Jacob. The kids were happy, healthy, and thriving in school and their activities. Make sure you're subscribed to the channel. I'm almost at that 1,000 subscriber goal, and your support is what makes this possible. Hit that subscribe button right now. About 3 months after I received the letter, I made a decision. I called Sarah and asked if she thought my father would be open to having coffee with me, just the two of us, no expectations or agenda other than talking. Sarah said she thought he would be, that he'd been hoping for contact, but respecting my space. So we set up a meeting at a neutral coffee shop halfway between our homes. I was nervous driving there, not sure what I'd say or how I'd feel seeing him face to face after all these months. When I walked into the coffee shop, he was already there, sitting at a corner table, looking older and more vulnerable than I remembered. He stood up when he saw me, and for a moment, we just looked at each other. "Thank you for coming," he said quietly. "I wasn't sure you would." We sat down, and for the first few minutes, we made awkward small talk about the weather, about Austin traffic, about anything other than the elephant in the room. Finally, I took a deep breath and said, "I got your letter. I've read it several times." My father nodded, his hands wrapped tightly around his coffee cup. "I meant every word. I've been doing a lot of thinking, a lot of work with my therapist, and I'm starting to understand how much damage I caused. Not just recently, but over your whole life. I'm sorry, Daniel. I'm so deeply sorry." We talked for 2 hours that afternoon. Really talked, maybe for the first time ever. He told me about his own childhood, about a father who measured love in criticism and withheld affection as punishment. He told me about feeling like a failure in his career, watching younger men get promoted past him, feeling trapped in a job he hated but lacking the courage to change. He told me about his resentment toward my success, how instead of being proud, he felt diminished by it, as if my accomplishments somehow highlighted his failures. I told him about growing up feeling like I was never good enough, about the years I spent trying to earn his approval only to realize it might never come. I told him about the impact his behavior had on my self-esteem, about how I still sometimes heard his critical voice in my head when I was facing challenges. I told him about the moment at the Sunday lunch, about how seeing my children hurt by his words had finally given me the strength to draw the line I should have drawn years earlier. "I don't know if we can have a relationship, Dad," I said honestly. "Too much has happened, and trust doesn't rebuild overnight. But I'm willing to consider the possibility. Maybe start with occasional coffee like this. See if you can maintain the changes you're making. I need to see consistent, long-term change before I can let you back into my life or my children's lives." My father nodded, and I saw tears in his eyes. "I understand. That's more than fair. I'll take whatever you're willing to give, and I won't push for more. I'm just grateful you're willing to have this conversation at all." We ended that meeting with a handshake, not a hug, but it was a start. Over the next several months, we met for coffee every few weeks. Sometimes the conversations went well, and I could see glimpses of the person my father was becoming. Other times, old patterns would emerge, a critical comment or a defensive response, and I'd have to remind him of the boundaries I'd set. But he'd apologize, correct himself, and the fact that he was willing to do that work was significant. I chose the boundary, and the consequences were severe. I lost my relationship with my father for over a year. I caused pain to my mother and my sister. I forced my entire family to confront truths we'd all been avoiding for decades.
And you know what?
It was worth it. Every difficult moment, every doubt, every fear was worth it because my children are growing up in a healthier environment than I did. They're learning that respect is not optional, that love should not hurt, and that it's okay to walk away from relationships that harm you, even if those relationships are with family. Emma said something to me a few months ago that brought tears to my eyes. We were talking about a conflict she was having with a friend at school, a girl who was being manipulative and mean. Emma was struggling with whether to continue the friendship or end it, worried that ending it would make her a bad person. I told her that choosing not to be treated badly doesn't make you bad, it makes you wise. She looked at me with those serious eyes that make her seem older than her 11 years and said, "Like when you made Grandpa move out because he was mean to us. You weren't being bad, you were being wise." In that moment, I knew that the choice I'd made, as painful as it was, had taught my daughter something invaluable about self-respect and boundaries. And that lesson alone made everything worthwhile. Subscribe to the channel if this story has touched you. I'm working toward 1,000 subscribers, and your support means everything. Click that red button and help me reach that milestone. The evolution of my relationship with my father has been a masterclass in cautious optimism. I want to believe in his change. I want to trust that the work he's doing is genuine and lasting. But I've also learned to protect myself and my family by moving slowly, by requiring consistent demonstration of new behaviors over time, by not rushing back into old patterns just because it would be easier or more comfortable. There are still hard moments. A few months ago, my father made a critical comment about a parenting decision I'd made regarding Jacob's bedtime. It was subtle, just a little dig wrapped in concern, but I recognized it immediately as the old pattern trying to reassert itself. I called him on it right away, reminded him of the boundaries we'd established, and told him that if he couldn't respect my parenting decisions, our visits would need to be paused again. He got defensive at first, started to argue that he was just trying to help, that I was being too sensitive. But then he caught himself, took a breath, and apologized. "You're right," he said. "I was falling back into old habits. Thank you for pointing it out. I'll do better."
And he did.
That's the difference now. He's willing to be corrected, willing to take accountability, willing to change his behavior instead of defending it. My mother told me that watching my father's transformation has been both heartbreaking and inspiring. Heartbreaking because it made her realize how much of their marriage was lost to his stubbornness and pride, all those years when he could have been this person, but chose not to. Inspiring because it proved that it's never too late to change, that even at 60 years old, even after decades of destructive patterns, growth is possible. She said something profound to me over coffee one afternoon. "Your father and I could never have done the work we've done if we'd stayed together. Sometimes you have to lose everything to find yourself, and that's what happened to both of us. I don't regret the divorce, even though I grieve for what our marriage could have been if we'd both been healthier people. Jennifer has been my rock through all of this. When I doubted whether I'd done the right thing, when I felt guilty about my father's circumstances, when I worried that I'd been too harsh or too rigid, she reminded me of why I'd made the choices I made. She reminded me of Emma's tears, of Jacob's confusion, of the years of criticism and conditional love that had preceded that final Sunday lunch. She also supported me when I decided to slowly let my father back into our lives. Some people thought I should cut him off permanently, that allowing any contact was setting myself up for more hurt. But Jennifer understood that I needed to leave the door open for redemption, not for my father's sake but for my own. I needed to know that I'd given him every opportunity to change, that if our relationship ultimately failed, it wouldn't be because I was unwilling to try. Our daughter Rachel, now 18 months old, is too young to understand any of this family history. To her, Grandpa Robert is just another adult who visits occasionally, who plays with her gently, who brings her small gifts and reads her books. She doesn't know about the eviction, about the years of dysfunction, about the hard work of rebuilding. Maybe someday we'll tell her, when she's old enough to understand. Or maybe we'll let her have a relationship with her grandfather that isn't weighted down by the past, that gets to start fresh in a way mine never could. The property that started all of this, the house I bought to save my parents, sold to a young family with 3 kids. I drove by it once, about a year after the sale, and saw children's bikes in the driveway and a swing set in the backyard. It made me happy to see it being used by a family who is building happy memories there, to know that the house itself could have a new story, one not defined by the pain and conflict it had witnessed during my family's time there. The money from that sale has been put to good use. Emma's trust fund will help pay for college. Jacob's will do the same. Baby Rachel's is just beginning to grow. And the donation to the charity that helps families dealing with emotional abuse has funded counseling services for dozens of families, helping them break their own cycles of dysfunction. Knowing that some good came from that painful chapter brings me a sense of peace. Make sure you hit that subscribe button before we wrap up this story. I'm so close to reaching 1,000 subscribers, and each one of you matters. Click subscribe and be part of this community I'm building. Sarah's perspective on everything that happened has been interesting to observe. As the middle child, she'd spent her life trying to keep peace between me and our father, trying to make everyone happy, trying to smooth over conflicts. The eviction and its aftermath forced her to confront the fact that you can't make other people get along. You can't fix other people's relationships, and trying to do so only exhausts you without solving anything. She told me that watching me set that boundary, as painful as it was, gave her permission to set her own boundaries in her life. She'd been in a relationship with someone who was emotionally manipulative, and she'd been struggling to leave because she felt guilty, felt like she owed it to him to keep trying. Seeing me walk away from my father despite the guilt, despite the family pressure, despite everything, helped her find the courage to end her unhealthy relationship. Now she's engaged to Marcus. Yes, the same Marcus who was my attorney during the eviction. They met when she came to one of the court hearings to support me, and they're building a relationship based on mutual respect, healthy communication, and genuine partnership. She credits my willingness to blow up the family system with giving her the wake-up call she needed to examine her own patterns and make different choices. It's strange to think that something as painful as evicting my father could have such far-reaching positive effects. My mother found her independence. Sarah found her voice. I found my boundaries. My children learned what healthy self-respect looks like. And my father, eventually, found the motivation to become a better person. None of it was easy, and all of it was messy, but that's how real change happens. Not in neat, tidy resolutions, but in the complicated, painful work of choosing to do things differently. I sometimes wonder what would have happened if I hadn't brought those property deeds to that Sunday lunch, if I'd just swallowed my father's insult one more time, if I'd continued the pattern of enabling and excusing his behavior. I think I know the answer. My father would have continued to escalate, my children would have continued to be hurt, and I would have continued to model for them that love means accepting mistreatment. Eventually, something would have broken, maybe my mental health, maybe my relationship with Jennifer, maybe my children's sense of self-worth. By acting when I did, by drawing that line in the sand, I prevented a slower, more insidious kind of damage. And I taught my children something essential, that you can love someone and still refuse to accept unacceptable behavior from them. That family doesn't give you the right to harm people without consequences. That protecting yourself and your children is not selfish, it's necessary. The wedding between Sarah and Marcus is coming up in a few months, and she's asked me to walk her down the aisle since our father's relationship with her is still somewhat strained. It's an honor I never expected, and it feels like a beautiful symbol of how our family has reorganized itself around health and respect rather than obligation and tradition. My father will be invited to the wedding as a guest, but he won't have a prominent role, and he's accepted that with grace and understanding. My mother will be there too, probably with her boyfriend Richard, and there's a beautiful irony in the fact that my parents will be at the same event, divorced but both healthier than they were when they were married. They're polite to each other now, cordial even, like friendly acquaintances rather than people who spent nearly 4 decades married. It's not the fairy tale ending where they get back together, but it's a realistic, healthy ending where they've both moved on to better versions of themselves. Jennifer is 7 months pregnant with our second child together, another girl we're naming Claire. Emma and Jacob are excited to be big siblings again, and little Rachel is too young to understand but will have a sister close in age to grow up with. Our family keeps growing, keep evolving, and I'm grateful every day for the life we've built. If you've stayed with me through this entire story, thank you. And if you haven't subscribed yet, please do so now. I'm working toward that 1,000 subscriber goal, and you can help me reach it. Just click that red subscribe button. My career has continued to thrive, and I recently got another promotion that came with a significant raise. But the difference now is that I have a healthy relationship with money and family. I'm not using my financial success to buy love or approval. I'm not funding other people's lives at the expense of my own boundaries. I'm generous with the people I love, but that generosity is no longer expected or demanded. It's freely given when and how I choose. I help my mother with occasional expenses, not because she needs it. She's quite capable of supporting herself now, but because I want to, and it brings me joy. I've paid for Sarah's wedding photographer as a gift because I'm genuinely happy for her and want to contribute to her special day. I've even helped my father with a medical bill when he needed surgery last year, not because I owed it to him, but because I could, and I chose to. The difference is that all of these gifts are given from a place of abundance and choice, not obligation and manipulation. My father's gratitude for the help with his medical bill was genuine and touching. He didn't expect it, didn't demand it, and didn't take it for granted. He thanked me multiple times, told me he didn't deserve my generosity, and asked how he could pay me back. I told him the same thing I tell him every time we talk now. Just keep doing the work, Dad. Keep being the person you're becoming. That's all the payment I need. The transformation in our relationship is something I never thought I'd see. We'll never be close in the way some fathers and sons are. Too much damage was done over too many years for that. But we have something now that we never had before: honesty. We can talk about the past without defensiveness or denial. We can acknowledge the hurt without pretending it didn't happen. We can move forward without needing to forget. A few weeks ago, my father asked if he could write a letter to Emma and Jacob, apologizing more fully for what he'd said that day at the Sunday lunch. He wanted my permission before doing so, wanted to make sure I thought it was appropriate and wouldn't cause them more pain. We talked about it at length, Jennifer and I and our family therapist, and we decided it would be okay as long as the letter was reviewed by us first. The letter my father wrote was beautiful. It was age-appropriate, taking full responsibility without burdening them with adult complications. He told them that what he'd said was wrong, that it came from his own problems and had nothing to do with them. He told them they were wonderful kids and that he was grateful they were willing to give him another chance to be a better grandfather. He asked for their forgiveness, but said he understood if they couldn't give it, that he would keep working to earn it regardless. Emma read the letter and cried, then asked if she could write back to Grandpa. Her letter said that she forgave him but that it had hurt a lot and she needed him to promise never to say mean things like that again. She told him she was glad he was getting help and that she liked the new version of Grandpa better than the old one. It was honest, direct, and emotionally mature in a way that made me incredibly proud of her. Jacob's response was simpler, as befits a 9-year-old boy. He drew a picture of the whole family, including Grandpa, all holding hands and smiling. He wrote, "I forgive you," at the top in his careful handwriting. When we gave both letters to my father at our next supervised visit, he cried openly, holding those pieces of paper like they were made of gold. "I don't deserve this," he whispered. "I don't deserve their forgiveness or their love." "Maybe not," I said honestly. "But they're choosing to give it anyway, and that's the gift. Don't waste it." He hasn't. In the year since receiving those letters, my father has been the most consistent, reliable, respectful version of himself I've ever known. He shows up when he says he will. He follows the rules and boundaries Jennifer and I set. He treats the kids with gentleness and patience. He asks permission instead of assuming rights. He's become, improbably, a decent grandfather, even if he was never a decent father.